and we'll just get this thing going. So, guys, this is the Average Waterfowl podcast. Appreciate you guys joining today. I have Houston Havens on the call. He's the director of Mississippi's Waterfowl program. Houston, thanks for joining.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So tell me real quick just a little bit about what it is that you do and the program that you guys got going in Mississippi.
Sure. I'm the coordinator for the Waterfowl program, Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, which is our state agency. And what I do in that role is highly dependent on the time of year, but we do a lot of private land technical guidance for landowners or leaseholders who are looking for management advice, or maybe even trying to get them linked up with cost share programs to help achieve their management goals for their property. So as you can imagine, in Mississippi, fairly large waterfowl hunting state, very popular here. So that takes up quite a bit of time during the spring and summer months. As we're getting on into the fall like we are now, habitat management for the most part is kind of tailing off, and so we're starting to get around and work with our public lands, getting ready for the hunting season. And that could entail going out and evaluating habitat, looking at things that we may need to do differently before we start putting the water on, because that really changes our ability to do things once we start pumping up, which won't be too long. Now that I look at the calendar here, we're late September already. But other than that, when I first got this job, I thought I was going to be out doing those kind of things year round. But of course, there's a lot of office time involved with the job, looking at waterfowl management from a population level, regulations level. We sit on a group called the Mississippi Flyway Council, and the technical section of that council, where we have conversations with other states in the Mississippi Flyway and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to try to manage hunting opportunities, whether that be hunting regulations, bag limits, things like that, to kind of maximize what people would like to get out of waterfowl hunting within certain limits, and scientific bounds, of course. So keeping a pulse on those sort of things is a big role of the job as well.
Awesome. So is that your background? Do you have a scientific background, like some sort of biologist degree?
Yes, I went to Mississippi State University for my education. I did my bachelor's and my master's degrees there. So in general, you kind of generalize in a bachelor's program in wildlife science, and then you get into more of a specialty type program with a master's degree. So my master's degree was obviously focused on waterfowl because I knew that was the kind of employment that I wanted to go into when I finished.
That's awesome. That's very cool. The Mississippi River Flyway thing, I was reading recently on Ducks Unlimited that they have like a new initiative trying to kind of restore some of those bottomlands. It seems like a really large project. Is that something you guys are working in conjunction with DU on that, or are you aware of that?
We do work heavily with DU on wetland restoration projects in Mississippi. We've got one that we're trying to get cranked up right now on Mahana Wildlife Management Area down around Vicksburg in the South Delta. It was a grant proposal that we wrote working with Ducks Unlimited to get federal funding to improve and basically create some new waterfowl habitat on Mahana there. So we work very closely with DU. There's a portion of there is a portion of reforestation that's in that project where we're looking to improve general wildlife habitat on areas where we can't very reliably or efficiently get flooded annually. So taking out a little bit of high ground, putting it back into forested habitat. As you know, the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, what we call the Mississippi Delta portion of the state, used to be a vast expanse of bottomland hardwood habitat, and land uses have definitely changed that habitat overall. It's dominated by agriculture now, which is not a bad thing for waterfowl at all.
Sure.
But we try to keep those things in mind, and if it's not a place that we can efficiently and effectively manage for wetland habitat, then we'll look for a better use for those acres on that property.
I've often wondered about um, something that kind of relates to this. I spent a lot of time in the Mississippi Delta. It's really where I feel home, and that landscape is I'm drawn to it. But I often wonder, you know, as you drive through the Delta on the Mississippi side or the Arkansas side, I mean, the majority of that land is in production, right?
Right.
How long has it been like that? Are we talking 40 years, 50 years, 100 years? I mean, certainly agriculture's always played an important role in that geographical region, but I I wonder how the landscape has changed and how quickly that happened. I don't know if you have like any insight to that.
Yeah, I would be guessing on that. Probably the early 1900s. 20s and 30s. There was a lot of that coincided with the Corps of Engineers building a levee system and doing flood control. So that there were opportunities for clearing land and implementing agriculture there. It's certainly increased since that time. With technology and other things. The ability to grow crops, drainage for agriculture. Ditching. You drive across the Delta and you see a lot of straight line ditches. Of course, those are man-made ditches. Those were not natural parts of the system there by any means. But there's still a lot of opportunity within that agricultural landscape. We work with a lot of agricultural producers and landowners to put in wetland infrastructure on those agricultural lands so they can still rock along farming, produce a crop, and then get into this time of year, and then they'll start thinking about putting boards in a water control structure that we might have helped them get a cost share for, things like that, or putting up a small pad and being able to put some fall and winter water on that agricultural landscape because it's what we have to work with.
Right.
Mississippi is about 90% privately owned, so if we're not working with those private landowners in the landscape, we're not able to be very effective.
That makes sense. I didn't realize that was an opportunity for landowners to work directly with you and do some sort of cost sharing um, program in some way to help get that land into back into kind of wetlands or flooded out or I just always kind of assumed that was something that the owner would just bite the bullet on.
Some of them do, but if they contact us, it's not always something that we directly are implementing, but we try to stay involved with a lot of partnerships and try to keep our pulse on what's available out there
Hmm.
for landowners to get tapped into for cost share programs. Whether it be just writing them a management plan, which we also do, just giving them advice on kind of a step-by-step process of what they need to be thinking about at different times of year, or all the way to the side of getting them linked up with a cost share program that could provide a water control structure or some cost share for dirt work on a levee, things like that. And those programs change. They depend on funding levels each year, but we have a pretty good grasp on what's available from year to year, and we're able to help out a lot of landowners in that way.
That's awesome. Is that primarily grant based?
It is one of the primary ones that I am involved with is called the Mississippi Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, and that money is allocated yearly through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and so we sit on that committee with Fish and Wildlife Service with other non-governmental organizations to administer those funds to private landowners. So we're part of the delivery team for those funds, I guess you would say. It's not actually our money, but we're helping get it put on the ground in the proper areas. So.
Sure, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. So, is that something that other now as far as like that land management program, is that something that landowners could reach out to you guys and start putting together a plan, or even you mentioned leases as well. I mean, what goes into something like a land ownership um, program? If you could kind of give me the tree level view of that.
Yeah, so they just contact us. We set up a time we can go out and look at the site with the landowner. We try to get as much information about the property as we can beforehand. That way we can use, again, technology. Who would have thought? To look at whatever we can, whether it's mapping, remote sensing, things like that. Look at the general landscape around that property and see maybe what's already going on there and how they could best tie into that landscape, because waterfowl are not just going to be using their property. If we're talking about waterfowl in particular, they're going to be using that entire regional landscape. So we try to keep that in mind when we're working with a landowner. But so they set up a time when's good for them. We meet them on the property, talk about what they have been doing in the past, and maybe what they would like to do. A lot of times it's just kind of blank slate. They want to know what we think, and so we'll take some notes there in the field, go back to the office, think about it a little bit more, and then put together maybe a management plan of what we recommend based on what they have and what their ability to do is. And then also, if they're interested in and the situation is conducive to getting some kind of assistance, whether it be funding assistance or something else, then we also put them in touch with. If it's not us, we'll put them in touch with the right agencies or organizations to continue pursuing that.
Right. That's awesome. So I know, like, my brother and I, our ultimate goal is to eventually buy property in Mississippi, right? Every hunter's dream.
Sure.
So it's pretty incredible that you're a resource for the average Joe to kind of put together a legitimate plan, and I don't need to go and start reading. Well, I mean, it doesn't hurt, but I don't need to start reading scientific journals on waterfowl to, like, hopefully try to put together my own plan to maybe grow a nice habitat for waterfowl. That's like, I just never knew that there was a system in place to help guys out like that. It's an incredible
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely. It can be kind of intimidating with especially maybe a new landowner or somebody that's just getting into wetland management. So we try to provide as much information as we can, whether it's pamphlets or literature while we're on site as well. But just staying in contact with those landowners, keeping a dialogue, letting them give us a call when they come up with something, because especially in the South, wetland habitats are so dynamic. I can go look at a property one day and give a recommendation, but if I don't have any follow-up with that landowner, the vegetation, a lot of things are going to change throughout the growing season on that property. So
For sure.
it's not just a one-shot deal by any means. We try to, as best we can, and as time allows, stay involved with those landowners and give them the best service that we can.
So these are projects that are probably spanning years. Like, you're
Yeah,
reevaluating after year 1, year 2, year 3, and it's
that's
kind of
right.
iterative process.
That's right. We can put together a plan for multiple years in a general sense, whether it be, say for example, a landowner has multiple impoundments on a property. We can kind of talk in terms of how to rotate their management around. They don't necessarily want to do the same thing on the entire property every single year. They want to have some diversity in that. So we'll put together something like that with recommendations for future years. But yeah, in general, it's going to be revisiting the property, or at a minimum talking to that landowner multiple times about what's going on, what's changed, and adapting as we go.
Is that something that you guys have seen a lot of success with over the past few years, working with landowners, and, I mean, noticing numbers on a particular piece of property? Because ducks, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because these are things that I'm just not educated on, but they tend to kind of visit the same areas, right, as they're moving through the migration process. And there's this concept of, like, imprinting ducks to kind of come to your fields or whatever. is that something that over the years these landowners are like definitely seeing like, oh wow, we've seen a huge number or growth in the animals that we're seeing every year. I mean, obviously there's other factors playing into that,
Sure.
the migration and things like that, but are is it, is it quantifiable?
We don't do necessarily any detailed monitoring of these properties from year to year, but we do hear from the landowners on what works, and that, of course, that's the best barometer for 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 what we're doing and what we're helping them with. Is the landowner satisfied with what happened, or do they need to tweak something or change, make some changes? It's certainly can be a complex situation. Not every property has the same potential to be a great waterfowl property by any means, but we try to work within the bounds of what the landowner has available to them and where they're located, and we try to make recommendations that somewhat manage the expectations of a landowner. It's wetland habitat is valuable to a lot of other species besides waterfowl.
Sure.
So, most of the ones that we're working with, obviously their goal is to get waterfowl to respond to that habitat. But we know that no matter what the success level is there, we're still doing good conservation work by helping develop those properties. Yeah, we do get a lot of feedback on what worked, and a lot of it is very positive on things that landowners may have not ever considered doing with their property, and once they did it and saw a result, and they're pretty happy with it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's the cool thing about conservation, right? Is like oftentimes you have these organizations or like Ducks Unlimited or Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, right? And they go in and they work to conserve the habitat or promote the habitat of a single species. But you see like all of these tertiary improvements in other species, which is an incredible thing, and I think is often overlooked, especially like Ducks Unlimited. There's in the nesting areas, the prairie regions. There's all these other vast improvements that have happened that weren't really predicted as from a biology standpoint, as far as I understand. But
Absolutely.
I think that's, you know, it's always important to remember that you're a lot of good is happening, even though it might not necessarily just be surrounding waterfowl. I'm wondering,
That's right.
I'm wondering what are like other species that thrive in wetland, habitat in Mississippi. I'm more educated on, what's going on in the prairie regions because that's kind of what you see in Ducks Unlimited magazines all the time. But um, you have like what?
Well, take for example, right now, this time of year, there's a lot of migratory non-game birds, shorebirds and wading birds in particular, that have already kind of getting into the peak of their migration as they're heading down into Central South America, and as you can imagine, this time of year in the southeast, a lot of agriculture is still being harvested, but a lot of it is harvested already, and there's just harvested dry fields out there. So wetland habitat in this time of year in particular, whether it's somebody managing a wetland for teal hunting during the September season or the Canada goose season, which is still open right now, those can be extremely valuable habitats in a very limited situation, or wetland habitat availability is very limited during this time of year, I guess I should say. So there's a lot of bird watching that goes on those kind of habitats during this time of year. They're what we would call non-consumptive. They're not out there hunting the birds, but they are using those wetland habitats that will eventually probably be duck holes later on this winter to look at all these shorebirds and wading birds that are coming through in huge numbers and using that very important wetland habitat right now.
That's such an obvious thing that I just have totally glanced over and haven't considered, because you see that migration when you're there, right? It's
Sure.
but yeah, there needs to be habitat for those animals as well. oftentimes we get so tunnel vision or focused on just what we're providing for ducks. I I've never considered that until you just brought that up. That's
Yeah, and it's a big point for us to get out to the public as a state wildlife agency that these habitats are they're managed by hunters by the most part, and they're managed for eventual hunting, but they're getting way more wildlife benefits year round in these habitats that are being managed with the end goal for that landowner of being shooting a bag limit of mallards during January, in Mississippi. But it's a lot of conservation is coming on the backs of the private landowner with a lot of their own money being invested in that.
Man, it never ceases to amaze me that hunters are responsible for so much conservation, and every day I learn about it. I learn a new thing that that kind of benefits the ecosystem or the natural environment that hunters bring to the table, private landowners bring to the table, which is, I feel like it's important to get that message out because we don't really feel this in Mississippi or in Tennessee, but there's like this massive anti-hunting movement that's kind of going around popular culture these days, and I think those people are just unaware of the issues that hunters, what hunters are really about and the conservation that occurs. We have self-imposed taxes. We donate to organizations like Ducks Unlimited. These owners work with institutions like you to create these habitats and manage these habitats and try to or at least invigorate these habitats. So I always try to help educate other guys and educate myself on this because I think it's an important message to kind of preach as we interact in our communities, so that we can try to spin the conversation away from so much of the anti sentiment. Because I mean, there's a few bad apples in the hunting community, right? And
Sure.
and sometimes people tend to focus on the extremes, and it's always good to provide guys with ammunition to paint a different picture and shine a positive light on hunting and what that does.
That's right. You made a good point about kind of being a little bit insulated from some of that, being in the southeast, Mississippi and Tennessee. But we also have to think about we manage waterfowl populations on a continental scale. So the areas that are getting those pushbacks on the hunting community, they are directly involved in conservation, like you talked about on the breeding grounds in the northern United States and in southern Canada, well, all of Canada actually. Those habitats are very important to the birds that we hopefully are going to be seeing here in the next couple of months. So it's all connected for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. And so I want to quickly shift the conversation a little bit because I definitely want to talk about public lands. I grew up, I didn't grow up in a hunting family I grew up in a big city. I grew up in Atlanta. So I didn't know anything about hunting. When I went to Ole Miss, I started to learn about it, and my access was through public land. That's all I had available to me. I hunt public land to this day. I was hunting public land Tuesday. After this podcast, I'm actually going hunting on public land at WMA right next to my house. It's something that I cherish. In Mississippi, you said that 90% of the land is in private ownership. But Mississippi has a lot of public land that are available to hunters, and I feel like that's often overlooked. Guys are sometimes, don't get me wrong, I've been out on public hunts and have had like 15 guys within a few hundred yards of me, but all you have to do is go a little further because there's massive tracts of land available to you. And
That's right.
It's pretty incredible, and it's a part of the the story in Mississippi that I like to preach, and I always like to introduce to guys that ask me questions about hunting and how to get into it. And I always try to explain you don't need the multi-$1,000 lease or to own your own land. You can go and do this yourself with a bag of decoys and just kind of hike in. And if you could paint the picture a little bit for guys on what's available to them in Mississippi as far as public land goes and waterfowl, maybe a little bit about how that is looked at from your department and how you guys approach it and manage it, that'd be really cool to hear about.
Sure. We've got like you said, a variety of wildlife management areas, and that's what the term we give to our state-managed lands, state-owned and managed lands in Mississippi. There are other sources of public land. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service owns and manages national wildlife refuges. A lot of hunters, of course, will get those confused about what the land ownership is. There's also another big public land ownership in Mississippi is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Around the flood control reservoirs, there's quite a bit of acreage of public land around those areas that sometimes may be a little more overlooked. But Mississippi, in waterfowl management terms, we've got a lot of wildlife management areas spread across the Mississippi Delta region, which of course is going to be our main zone of the state for waterfowl hunting. There are also some other areas that do get quite a bit of waterfowl hunting at times in the northeast part of the state, around the Tennessee Tombigbee Waterway. There's a fair bit of waterfowl hunting that goes on there. But within the Delta, kind of Delta focused, we have different hunting regimes, I guess is what I would call them, on our state-owned areas. We've got some areas that are just 7 days a week, wide open access, just kind of open access, I guess is what I call them. First come, first serve. You just go in, find a place to hunt, and hunt. I guess before I get too far into it, I guess I should remind hunters that basically all that's needed, in addition to your hunting license to hunt all this vast area in Mississippi, is a $15 wildlife management area permit. So those are available on an annual basis. They last 1 year from the date of purchase, so it's a pretty good bargain to be able to hunt that much land on $15.
Oh yeah.
So the different hunting setups for waterfowl areas in Mississippi, you've got those open access areas. You've got some areas that are only certain days of the week, and those could be. We've got them set on different schedules, so they're not all open on the same days. They kind of cover different days of the week. But so, for example, an area might be open on a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. That's a fairly common schedule that we have. Then to go further into a little more intensively managed area, we have waterfowl draw hunts on some management areas. And so what that means is starting in early November, I believe, we'll start advertising those draw hunt applications on our website, mdwfp.com. And so hunters go on there and they prioritize the dates that they think they'll be able to hunt. Of course, this is before the hunting season, so they've got a little bit of room to plan out when they might be able to hunt and in which particular wildlife management areas they'd like to apply for. They can apply for those as many hunts, as many days, as many areas as they would like to hunt, so then those are done on a draw basis. So if a person is drawn for a place that he or she applied for, then they'll get a notification saying you were drawn for this area on this day, and so what that does is that gives that hunter a guaranteed location and date that they know they're going to be able to go and hunt on managed waterfowl habitat and have that place basically to themselves. You talked about being crowded out on some areas, and that does happen on public land everywhere. If
And
it's
everywhere. Yeah.
right, if it's a place that has birds, then hunters are going to try to get there, and that's what that land is for. So we try to mix it up a little bit and provide a little bit more of a controlled quality opportunity for someone to go out. And what we've seen, I was talking with somebody yesterday about this. What we've seen from that is that really we feel like it really boosts. The number of new waterfowl hunters that are going to get out there and basically give it a try. They may still be going with someone who has waterfowl hunting experience, but it's a little less intimidating for somebody to be able to say, hey, I know I'm going to be able to hunt this managed area on this day, and I'm not going to have somebody hunting right beside me, and
Oh yeah.
they're a little more apt to apply for those kinds of hunts.
That's awesome. I've never done one of those, and I, I I wish I had known about it, or I just didn't know what I didn't know when I was younger, because I started hunting when I was 18 or 19, and just I just didn't know anything about it. I just knew what I kind of bought my license at Walmart, and then if I could find some public land somewhere that had a gate, it was like okay. And I spent a lot of time hunting in the hill country, nowhere near a duck, and spent a lot of wasted hours out there. So I think that's a really important thing for guys to figure out, is like, yeah, you can, if you're a new hunter, you can basically get access to some of the best habitat that there is,
Right.
and have a great hunt. It's a little it's a little intimidating doing a draw, because some guys like just don't really know what it is. I've drawn for other types of hunts, and it and but it's not a bad process at all. It's actually a fairly easy process and comfortable process. Is the draw system for that? Is that on a point system, or
It is somewhat, if you basically the more you put in, the more times you put in for a particular hunt on a particular area, that increases your chances of being drawn. Basically,
gotcha.
I there's also a portion of that draw which takes into account first time applicants. So that, again, going back to like we talked about, getting new hunters, new waterfowl hunters, or at least somebody that's new to hunting wildlife management areas, kind of gives them a chance as well. One thing I didn't talk about was on most of these draw hunt areas, there's also what we call standby opportunity. So as you can imagine, not 100% of people who are drawn are actually going to show up that day. Things change with people's schedules. Weather changes. All kinds of things can happen between the time someone's drawn and the actual hunt day. So
Sure.
on some of these intensively managed areas, we have staff that are there actually running the draw hunt each morning. And what that does is allow us to have people show up the day of a hunt and put their name on a list, basically for a chance to fill any positions that were left open by someone that didn't show up for their draw. So it is a little bit of a risk, of course, involved in that. We try to run those draws early enough in the morning where if somebody that was coming on a standby opportunity didn't happen to get in on that area, hopefully they could have somewhere else to drive to that's an open access area, and they can potentially get in and still have a hunt on public land that day.
Yeah, that seems perfectly. It seems like a perfect scenario to me. It seems very manageable. You can always have plan A, plan B, and plan C. I mean, I end
Sure.
up moving around all over the place anyways. Like, sometimes you're just not where waterfowl want to be, and you need to move. So
That's
um,
right.
that's perfectly reasonable. I took a note. I wanted to talk about the WMA permit, the $15 permit. I think it's important to talk about this, because oftentimes I feel like young guys, or just new hunters in general, don't know where the money's going and why it's important to make sure that they pay for these things. And sometimes that might even go overlooked, right? Or they don't even know that they need a WMA permit to be hunting where they're hunting. Um, and first of all, these guys, you don't want to get a ticket, but second of all, I think it's really important to understand the where those funds are going, and that at the end of the day, it's a pretty important little, very small commitment from an individual standpoint that goes to a more important thing. So if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so those funds go into our our wildlife management area system, which they're used for operating areas, paying for anything from regular maintenance. Excuse me. As you can imagine, there's a lot of expenses that go into, and anybody that's managing their own property knows there's a lot of expenses, not just buying seed to plant a food plot or something like that, but just general operation and maintenance of areas has a lot of expense to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course, I'm I'm a waterfowl hunter as well. Excuse me, and nobody likes to just automatically pay more for things. But if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, what's potentially available to you if you choose to use all the management areas that are available to you for $15, it, like we talked about earlier, it is a good deal. Fluctuate a small fluctuation in gas prices across a year. If you're driving to hunt all over the place like a lot of us do, that's going to make a whole lot more impact on how much money you spent, during a hunting season than a $15 permit, of course.
Yeah.
So, it is when you're able to put it in those terms that it is used for management of those state-owned properties, and it is a fairly small expense compared to equipment purchases and things like that we're doing to be able to pursue what we like to do. It's fairly small.
I think of it like this. I think of it as like a $15 permit that gives me access as a citizen to land. I mean, to just, it's at the end of the day, as you really don't even you don't even have to be a citizen of the state, and then it's like all of a sudden you now are a landowner on a massive scale. It's maybe a wrong way to think about it, but it's kind of appropriate in the sense that these are public lands in a way, and it's an incredible resource that people in Europe don't have this opportunity, right? Like you have to be ultra wealthy to go hunt in the UK or in Germany or something like that, whereas just an average American dude can go out and have access to hundreds of thousands of acres.
That's right. That's a good point. And we often don't talk about access to these areas outside of the hunting seasons, but they're still open public land during the summer months even. Mm-hmm. So we do get a fair amount of use from people just going out and hiking or whatever it may be, bird watching, things like that. Those non-consumptive sides of it as well. So it's not just a $15 for a hunting season. It's for the entire year. People can come out and enjoy those properties.
Absolutely. I mean, too, you got things like squirrel hunting. I mean, when is squirrel's almost always in season,
Sure.
So it's like you got a playground. It's a massive playground that I love it. I mean, a WMA or public land is to me just one of the best, kind of rights that we as Americans have ever been given. It's such an incredible thing. So I always try to preach it, and I feel like especially younger guys, guys my age, or now I can't really say I'm young anymore. I'm not, but the younger generations just seem to know much less than the guys that I've kind of learned from, right? And seem to not leverage it. They seem to think that they have to have. They watch too many videos. They have to have the perfect corn field or the rice field or the perfect timber hole to go and enjoy a hunt, and it's just not true, So I always try to help guys. I mean, I know guys that will not hunt unless it's on private property. They're like, I just don't. Well, this is like, that just doesn't register in my brain. I don't understand it. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? You can go hunt whenever you want. So, anyways, does and to speak to that $15, that doesn't go to, it doesn't go to any of the other institutions in Mississippi's government or across the board in the U.S. It goes to the management of wild WMA lands, right?
That's
100% allocated. Yep. So if you're a strict libertarian, you don't have to worry about your funds being misused. Well, cool. So do you guys, in your department, are you guys monitoring numbers? Are you guys the ones that are running the planes, looking at bird populations and stuff like that in the state?
That's right. We are actually working on that process right now to get geared up for, it'll be mid to late November when we get back up in the plane to start our aerial waterfowl surveys. And so that is done by our agency. We use a survey method that was developed with some research through Mississippi State University. So it's scientifically defensible. We're not just getting up there and going and looking for ducks. We just to give you a quick rundown of that survey, we have east-west transects, basically just lines on a map. And we're only flying the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, the Delta portion of the state, just to get kind of our biggest areas where we're going to have wintering waterfowl. So we've got a computer program that selects our lines for us each time. We get up and fly those lines. We fly at a fixed elevation and have marks on the plane struts to tell us where we're going to be looking. So we're not just looking all over the place. We're counting basically what translates to 250 meter strip below the plane.
Wow, that's way more precise than I imagined.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people just think we're up there just looking around and trying to find big wads of ducks. But the way we do this is, it gives us a way that we can basically take a sample of what's out there, come back and run a computer program that's going to give us an estimate for the entire area, the entire Mississippi Delta, for example. So it's a really good method. We've been using it since the early 2000s. So we've got a good data set built up. Hunters like it because we're able to produce those what we call thunderstorm maps showing distributions of waterfowl as they change throughout the winter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty neat to be able to do that. Hunters can look at that over time and see, maybe even look at it and see which wildlife management area is in maybe a hot spot during that time of year that they could go and try to have a good hunt on. So.
And where can they find that? That's on the MDWFP site?
Yep, mdwfp.com. And under wildlife and hunting, they would go to waterfowl program. And then again, they're just called our aerial waterfowl surveys. So it takes a couple of days to look at the data and to write the report, but we usually get the survey reports up on the website a day or two after a survey is finished. Takes about 3 days of good weather flying to get a complete survey done. And so we're doing 4 per year. If we get good weather, we're going to do one in mid to late November, again in December. Then we're going to do an early and late January survey, typically each year.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that 2 come out in January. And those are things that I've learned to keep an eye on. Over time, it's like, oh wow, there's this great report that comes out, and it's a great resource because it could say, if you're down in the south and you're flexible in the southern part of the state, you need to go up north. It kind of gives you that information to make that decision for the weekend,
right.
So we've definitely learned to look at those. is there any kind of truth, and I don't know if you can speak to this from a you know, a quantifiable standpoint, or if you can speculate on it, or if you just don't even want to touch it because I don't know. But you know, you talk to a lot of old timers, and they say that the birds are just showing up later and later every year. Is that true, or is it just kind of like the grass was greener back then because you kind of have this sentiment of whatever? I know that I can attach sentiment to my past and
Sure.
whatever ways, you know. It's a weird human
Sure.
condition.
Yeah, you know, it's there's of course a lot of factors that would go into that, but one of the most common misconceptions that we get as feedback from people is that as soon as the duck season ends, you know, early to mid-February, that's when all the ducks get here. You know, we get those comments a lot.
Yeah.
And so we actually did a little bit of looking into this. We flew a survey in February, you know, using the same methods that we had been, you know, during the other months, and confirmed what we thought was the case, that basically what people are seeing is what we call the board pooling effect. So what that means is the last day of duck season, as a private landowner, you know, you're pretty well done using that habitat. You're gonna, you know, you finish your hunt on the last day of the season, you're probably gonna go ahead and pull those boards out of that water control structure and let that water go, because, you know, you may have a farmer that you have land leased to, or you may be the farmer that's got to get that land dried out in March so you can go in and plant your corn, or whatever the case may be. But, you know, to the casual person just driving around the Mississippi Delta in February, when they see water, they're probably going to see, you know, they may see a lot of birds on it, and it may look like, you know, well, you know, all these birds just got here, and now they're filling up all these duck holes that, you know, they weren't here in January. But so that's a really hard misconception to relay to someone, that, you know, that it's not actually a huge increase in birds. Now that may happen some winters, but you know, in general, that what we're seeing is a severe reduction in available habitat, and so the birds that are still here, you know, they just have less opportunity to move around and choose where they're gonna be during that time of year.
That's I'm sitting here laughing because I knew that there was not there that I was that the migration wasn't really showing up later. Or I didn't know that, but I was assuming it like that, and it's such an obvious answer, you know, that I just never considered, like the board pulling effect. The second you said it, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. That makes,
You know,
perfect sense.
as far as timing of migrations, Mississippi typically does receive our peak waterfowl numbers in late January, and we can show that with our aerial survey data.
For sure.
So late January is an important time for Mississippi duck hunting. There's no doubt about that. You know, it stands to reason that habitat is also typically at its peak availability during that time of year, just with winter rainfall being collected. Not everybody can pump groundwater in their duck holes, so you know, habitat increases. Waterfowl populations, local populations respond to that. Weather in general is going to be a little colder in late January. So all those factors kind of combine, and what we see is our peak numbers typically late January.
Sure, there's no doubt about that. But I mean, it's steady. It's weird. Like some, you know, I don't know. Some years it's colder, some years it's not.
Sure.
Do you guys follow? I mean, do you guys keep a pretty consistent temperature log? I mean, I guess you have that through other scientific studies and record. Right. But you know, as far as like correlating that with peak numbers and duck migrations, is that something you guys have in a database for sure?
It's not something that we directly have in a database or collect ourselves and analyze. We do keep a pulse on it. That's kind of the frontier of a lot of waterfowl research right now, is looking at weather severity indexes, basically, or what they're called. And, you know, what does it take to move birds from this area. And preliminarily, a lot of what is being found is it's not necessarily just freezing temperatures. It has a lot to do with duration. So, you know, we're all, as waterfowl hunters, we're all guilty of looking at the 10-day forecast and seeing one night of freezing temperatures and thinking, okay, that next day, you know,
Sure.
and that's not a bad thing to do. You know, that's probably a safe bet that you might get a little push of birds, you know, into the area from that. It's definitely better than not using any weather data, but you know, if you were to get a 3-day stretch of temperatures like that, that's going to have a much more significant effect for a really strong migration.
Sure.
And also another thing to consider is it's you know, of course I'm in Mississippi, and so I'm experiencing Mississippi weather, but it's, you know, it's a little bit counterintuitive to think about. It's all about where the birds are and
Right.
what they're experiencing to be able to push them, you know, to a state like Mississippi at the southern end of the flyway. So, you know, cold weather in Mississippi is generally going to translate to colder weather the further north you go, but that's not always the case, you know,
Right.
with weather systems. So it's just another consideration to throw in there.
I tend to look at St. Louis a lot. You know, like
Yeah,
what's going on weather-wise in St. Louis, and I found that seems to have some sort of correlation because it seems like ducks, and I don't know, but it seems like when we get a push, maybe ducks are kind of staging up in that. I say staging, but that's just where they are. And then if they get a lot of snow and it covers their fields up, that might be when we start to get a push.
right, right.
Missouri had like a crazy good year last year, and I feel like we get those Missouri birds. I don't know if that's true. That's just
Absolutely.
totally
Yeah,
assuming that.
yeah, you know, absolutely. The Mississippi Flyway, of course, gets its name from the Mississippi River, you know, running through the flyway, and so, yeah, just in general, you can pick locations following north up the river, you know, and whatever that may be. You know, say for example the Boot Heel of Missouri, where they have a lot of waterfowl habitat there, a lot of good quality managed habitat. You know, those are pretty good areas to keep a pulse on because in general, you can reason that Mississippi's birds are going to be passing through that area. So,
Right.
you know, it's you know, another thing to consider is we have a lot of hunters in Mississippi that travel to hunt. You know, they go up and down the flyway and hunt other states. Mississippi also gets hunters from other states that basically will follow the migration.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
States in the northern part of the flyway are going to be closing their seasons earlier because of weather conditions and bird migrations. You know, a prime case is a couple of years ago, I believe it was. You know, it was just a mild winter up and down the flyway, and so you had states that hunting seasons were closing, and they still had a lot of birds that were using open water, you know, open fields, and so it really didn't provide weather didn't provide any incentive, and hunting pressure didn't provide any incentive for birds to continue to migrate, and so that kind of puts together a little bit of a perfect storm, I guess, of a bad situation if you're waiting in Mississippi for really big waterfowl numbers.
For sure. I feel like last year was kind of like that. It was just seemed really warm, but
Yeah,
and El Nino, that we had that weird weather pattern where it was warm up north and cold down here, and there was like, you know, it was so confusing to at least to my brother and Scott and I, and we're not scientifically trained in any kind of way to understand it, and we were just beyond confused last season, but that's part of it. What you know, we talk about my brother and I. We speculate about all this stuff constantly, right? And one of our things is that we wonder is when birds move down south, like if they go from the northern part of the state down to the southern part of the state or into Louisiana, is it feasible that when it kind of gets warm back up that we can get those birds back back up in our part of the state, or can they even go further back up into Missouri if there's a better food source up there? They're just the habitat's more conducive. Do you guys see that from the aerials?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's all of the above, I guess, is the best way to answer that question. We see some birds that are going to be showing up in Mississippi in October, and they're definitely not being weather stressed. They're just going to be early migrants that are going to come here. You've got some birds that are going to be using Mississippi as their total wintering destination. So, yeah, they're going to move around from day to day, but in general, they're going to stay fairly localized. Now, I say localized, I don't mean they're going to be staying on the property,
Sure.
The particular wetland, but they're going to bounce around in the general region. You've got other birds that are going to, like you said, they're going to move with fronts, both southern and northern directions. They're gonna kind of bounce around with different habitat availabilities. So you've kind of got a mix of all those different things. South Louisiana is gonna get a lot of birds that they're gonna blow through Mississippi and head down there and hang around for a while. But as conditions change, we're going to get a little bit of those. Pintails are an example. They're going to bounce from South Louisiana up into the Mississippi Delta and back and forth a lot of times during the middle of winter, during the hunting season. So it's definitely not a hard and fast rule about what ducks are going to do. They're kind of all individuals, and they're going to do different things for sure.
Even within subspecies, so like you might have some mallards that are early migrators, and just
Yep.
kind of how do you guys how do you look at that? How do you see that, and how do you study it? Is it all just based off of bands, or are you guys GPSing these things?
It's a little of both, actually. We're in the middle of, or actually toward the tail end. You mentioned GPSs. We're working with Mississippi State University on a mallard project right now, where a PhD student went out and captured mallards in Mississippi during the winter and put GPS transmitters on them, so he could follow those birds and get locations throughout the hunting season and even after hunting season until they left and headed back on their spring migration to try to get at some of those answers. To see what kind of habitats they were using directly, when they were using them, public versus private land. There's just a whole suite of things that those birds are doing that we're trying to get better information on so we can learn from them.
I would love to talk to him. Has he published his paper yet?
He hasn't. He's still doing his data analysis. He's done with field work, but he's working on that stuff right now.
Man, there's a book in that deal for him if he's a good rider. I mean, the waterfowl population would eat that up. That's cool. I would love to talk to him. Man, so these are all things that we really are just learning. I mean, certainly we've known about the migration for some period of time. I mean, it's obviously you can look at the sky and see that birds are moving through, but I mean, there has to be some new kind of knowledge coming out. It's like, okay, we're actually learning that not all birds act the exact same way. Maybe some of this was already assumed, but now it seems like you guys are having some legitimate evidence come out on this, which is very interesting.
Right. We keep going back to technology, but being able to track an individual bird, and know that that's the same bird and see what it's doing while it's here and how it's responding to hunting seasons and habitat availability. It's just it's really cool stuff.
As an Ole Miss fan, this is making it hard for me to hate Mississippi State for sponsoring these programs. I'm going to have to reconsider some things after this conversation. But that's really interesting. So, and these are all programs that you guys are helping work on. I mean, What else? Are there any other interesting studies that you guys are doing that you would want to talk about?
That's what's ongoing right now. We have some plans to, like I talked about, our big data set that we have with our aerial waterfowl surveys. It's we're getting some real time benefit from it by being able to put those reports out for hunters to look at and see those distributions. But then also we want to get some lasting long term benefit out of it through excuse me, through scientific research, looking at trends and seeing what can we learn that we're not thinking about. What is this information telling us? How can it inform our management or maybe even expansion of public lands if we have those opportunities? There's just a lot of information, basically what are the birds trying to tell us, when they're here, and what can we learn from them, because that's the best source of information that we have is what we can make a lot of assumptions, and we do make a lot of assumptions based on good science that we've already that's already been established, but we never want to stop learning basically what we can do better.
Awesome. And so you said that you had this new method for the aerial scouting or surveys, that started in the early 2000s. Were you guys doing aerial surveys before then, or is this in itself a brand new thing, or not brand new, but 15, 16-year-old thing?
Yeah, I would say the previous survey method was basically just to get up in a plane and fly around until you saw big concentrations of birds. And so you might have some predetermined areas, some management areas or reservoirs, things like that to go and look at. But basically what that method did was tell you if birds were on those particular areas, particular. And that has some valuable information for it, just because you can write a report and people that are hunting those areas can get that information. But it did not give us what we were interested in as far as an index of the Mississippi Delta in general. What are numbers region-wide doing? How are they changing through the years and across years, things like that. And so that's what we have now is a good estimate. Every time we're able to do a survey, we get a good estimate of what's out there. Even in, it's kind of hard to explain, but even in the areas that we did not fly, we're flying enough of the Mississippi Delta to give us a good, reliable estimate. We can say there's about, this number, this level of waterfowl abundance out there.
Right, with this margin of error.
Right, yeah. That's right.
So with that, can you take a look at some of these older surveys that you have, and if you have a survey and you say there's X amount of birds, from one location, can you guys extrapolate based off of the data that you had of what those numbers might have looked like for Mississippi in the 90s or whatever?
No, not really. We're not able to extrapolate from those because they basically would be what we would call point counts or point locations. So we don't have any really good information about basically what size or what area, and I'm talking about area as far as acres, things like that. We don't have a way to extrapolate that out. So if we said we saw this many birds on this 1,000 acre area, it wouldn't be informative to just expand that, blow that estimate up, because it wouldn't take into account areas where we didn't see birds. Sure. So this transect method that we're using, it's taken into account where all you surveyed and where you saw birds, where you did not see birds. That's just as valuable information to be able to give a reliable extrapolation to the entire area.
Sure. So it's cool, and now with these east-west transects, you guys are able to, and your computer program drawing those grid lines out for you, you're able to keep those variables consistent, I assume, which allows for a more precise data collection over time.
That's right.
I got you. Very cool. So are you guys, just out of curiosity, what's it like working across states or interstate with other waterfowl programs? Is there a lot of communication flowing uh, up the Mississippi River or
There
even into
is.
Canada?
Sure. Yeah. I mentioned earlier being involved with the Mississippi Flyway
That's
Council
right.
and the technical section, which is what I represent Mississippi on, is basically all of the states in the Mississippi Flyway and the Canadian provinces. Basically, they have a representative, which would be the equivalent of my position in all those areas. And so we get together twice a year and meet on issues like this. Whether it be research that's going on, getting updates from other states that may be working on things that we're interested in, looking at waterfowl harvest as a whole, within states and across states, looking at regulations and things that might need to be tweaked or looked at, refined. Just a whole suite of things, basically anything to do with waterfowl management, we're getting together and collaborating on. So it's not just Mississippi doing its own thing and Louisiana and all. We do some of that independently, of course,
Sure.
within our own states, but we all realize that we're basically managing and doing conservation for the same birds at some level. So it's a good system. We're able to do a lot of interaction with those other states and provinces.
How important are those polls that you guys run after the season, or like when you buy your new tag, to the research that you guys are doing? And on top of that, what percentage of hunters actually complete them, and are you guys getting enough data?
I would guess as a biologist, I would say we're never getting enough data. Hunter input when we do surveys, whether it be something Mississippi specific or the Harvest Information Program survey that hunters get. They get those questions asked to them about migratory bird hunting when they're buying a hunting license. So just to touch on that really quick, if you hunt migratory birds, every state that you hunt migratory birds in, you need to be basically what we call HIP registered, Harvest Information Program. Those are the questions that they ask you when you're purchasing your hunting license, of how many doves you shot last year, how many ducks, things like that. It's very important information because it does, it's not the sole source of information, but it does feed into the numbers that we get for harvest of those species and harvest rates, things like that. Band returns, is another source of information that we use. So it's not putting all of our eggs in one basket, but I would say that information is extremely important.
Okay, and if you get to ask those questions, because I just bought up a hunting license in a state that I've not hunted before, and it asked me about, did I kill any, Canadian geese or whatever the questions are, and you're filling it out for that state, right? It's not like across the board.
That's right.
Okay.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure I did that right. Okay, cool. Well, Houston, we've hit like an hour and 13 minutes. I don't want to take up any more of your time, and I really appreciate you taking this time to talk with me. I've learned a ton, and maybe we'll get a chance to get back together, and I'd like to get some guys to write in some questions that they might have for you, because I'm sure there's a plethora of things we didn't touch that you have probably a desire to speak about. I don't know if you want to touch on anything before we end the call, or
just to say thank you. This is the first podcast that I've been a part of. It's like you said, it's easy to fill up an hour with talking about things, and there's definitely more that could be covered. So again, just appreciate you inviting me to participate.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. It was fun. It was really fun. I had a whole notepad filled out with questions, and I don't even think I looked at it once. So you just took me down rabbit holes the entire time. But thanks, and guys, reach out to him if you're in Mississippi and you want to get involved in some of these programs. I'm sure he'd love to talk to you. But thank you for your time, Houston, and I hope you have a great rest of. I'm sure this is a busy time of the year for you, and then I hope you have a good waterfowl season as well.
All right, same to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.